Hey everyone, Lucky here. Today we're going to take a look at Meld, which is Ableton's new bitimbral synth, part of Live 12. We're going to dive into a patch that I made using it. We're going to break it down, have a look at the ways that I constructed it, and yeah, have some fun. Let's get into it. Okay, so just quickly, I'm using Push 3 as a controller today. It works really well because it integrates directly with Meld. I can get all the parameters straight up. It's in controller mode, so all my parameters are right there on the screen, and it lets me take advantage of all the MPE features as well, which is really handy for this particular patch that I designed. All right, so let's take a look. So I've got Meld opened up in Live 12, and as you can see, we've got engines A and B, and these represent the two independent layers for the synthesizer. And they've got almost identical controls all the way through for you to use. So if we look to the far left, we've got the oscillator for each engine, and so this is your fundamental sound source. We just click the drop-down menu and it gives you all the macro oscillators that Ableton has designed for this synth. And we'll get a bit into some of the more interesting ones later in the patch that I've designed. So if you move to the right, we've got two macro parameters per engine, which is dependent on the actual oscillator type. So for instance, this dual basic wave uses shape and detune as its macro oscillators, whereas the noisy shape uses a different set of parameters for you to tweak, and this will be dependent on the oscillator. Moving across, we've got our envelopes, LFOs, and settings for MIDI and MPE, and this is for both A and B. We just select the page to switch between the two engines, and I can actually click this little arrow here and it actually expands the modulation matrix, which reveals all of the parameters and targets that you can actually connect within Meld. And we're going to get into that much more detail later in this video. So like I said, LFOs, envelopes, and then we move over, we've got the filter section. Once again, an independent filter for each layer with a number of different filters to choose from. So as well as two independent parameters per filter as well, which is also dependent on the filter type. And then individual mixing and panning for it. And then at the very final end of it, we've got our sort of VCA of the synth. So we've got what sort of voice mode, is it mono, is it polyphonic, as well as spread, this weird sort of stereo panning effect. It spreads the voices out in the stereo field from what I can gather, and you can actually use that as a modulation source. And then you've got your volume. All right, so let's take a listen to the patch that you heard at the start. Basically, I really wanted to create a patch that took advantage of the two engines, have a really punchy bass line, but also had something that sort of was a bit more rhythmic and almost like an arpeggiator that could almost like play melodies on top using the second engine. So here's the patch without drums. Cool, so you can sort of hear, if we take off engine A, we just have the punchy sort of bass sound at the bottom. I'm using the noisy shape oscillator, so it's basically like a simple waveform with some noise introduced. I'm rolling it off with a filter and a really short envelope to get a really punchy sound for bass lines. So I can use this engine to just deliver really punchy bass lines and play it more like a traditional keyboard, for instance, using push. Like, that didn't work, did it? Man, they were such sensitive pads. And so yeah, this actually lets me play really punchy bass lines and play more like an actual keyboard on Push's pads. I've also got the MPE set up to control the filter cutoff, so if I apply a really low pressure to the pad, I can actually open up the filter really quickly, so I can actually sort of change between how I'm actually playing those bass lines using Push 3. So moving on to the second layer, we'll turn off engine B, turn on engine A. Let's just listen to it on its own quickly before diving into it. The main thing that I'm taking advantage of here is the new scale awareness in Ableton Live 12. With scale awareness, this device is locked to the scale that you have set in Ableton Live 12 here at the top. So I've got a C minor pentatonic set as my scale. Now, so what this means is that certain parameters in Meld 12 will automatically use that scale to output notes. So for instance, this dual basic shape is a scale-aware oscillator, and I'm actually modulating a whole bunch of things to lock the pitch to notes in that scale. So let's take a look. I'm sending LFO1, this is the LFO1 of engine A, to the pitch quantization. So it is modulating how much it quantizes the pitch relative to the scale set, which is the minor pentatonic. If we move over to LFO2, I'm actually modulating the rate of LFO1 to quantize and sort of get more randomization in how much quantization I'm actually achieving. And then I'm also using spread, which is that effect that I'm using at the start, to just give it a little bit more of detuning effect. Now, this is where Meld can get really complex. I'm actually cross-modulating from engine B using the LFOs in engine B to actually modulate engine A. So if we have a look over here in the cross-modulation section, it will tell you I'm sending LFO1 from engine B to the macro parameter of oscillator A. Bear with me. I'm also sending the same LFO to the filter frequency, as well as, what else am I sending it to? As well as the other macro oscillator. It's quite a slow LFO in engine B, so that's why what you're hearing is, as I hold one note down, you're hearing the shape of the wave change over time. So if we just listen to that again, you can hear it. It's actually changing from a sine wave to a square wave over the rate of the LFO, which is a nice slow one. So now I will just bring the two together. Just quickly turn on engine B. So when you bring it all together, that you have an actual complete voice to play with. We've got that punchy bass line at the bottom and the sort of evolving arpeggiation sound at the top. So the other cool thing is that I've got it set to polyphonic modes with 8 voices, which means I've got 8 independent voices to play with. I can actually get much more complex levels of harmony that get in turn modulated with all that modulation I talked about earlier. So we can actually get quite dense numbers of notes, all sort of becoming, you know, rich chords and levels of harmony. So a great way to use this patch would be to take advantage of all the new MIDI tools in Ableton 12. I was playing around with the seed generator in clip mode, and this actually sort of, you know, lets you generate really complex MIDI clips using a bunch of parameters. It takes advantage of all that polyphonic voices that I was talking about, and you can actually get really, really complex rhythms and melodies just with a click of a finger. So I'm gonna quickly show you that. So I recorded one of those kind of punchy bass lines at the start into just a clip in Ableton, and then I used this seed generation that's part of Ableton 12 to expand on that and create a more complex melody using that original idea. So let's just listen to that on its own. The way I took advantage of this is I had a basic bassline idea, I laid it down in a clip in Ableton, and then I used the seed generation to basically generate a more complex and randomized version of that idea. And then what I did, because I'm using polyphonic mode in Meld, I copied and pasted that clip a bunch of times and isolated different voices within the clip to get different combinations of notes. So if we listen to all together as what's generated by Ableton, we can hear the 2 engines, we can hear the 8 voices of polyphony. And so basically I just isolated the bass on its own, so the lower set of notes. If I wanted to, I could just get rid of engine A and just have that bass sound on its own. Get the drums going. Cool, and then I introduce another set of notes from that seed generation. So introduce the next layer. You can just try out different combinations. And remember, we're actually only listening to engine B. We haven't even introduced engine A yet. Now all together. And then let's turn on engine A. Try try the bass line with Engine 8 enabled this time. So on top of that, all I added was a bit of reverb, delay, and I really had almost a complete track. Other than that, I had a few effects on the drums that I was using, but really Meld was doing all the work, and I was only using one instance of it. If you have a look into some of the presets Ableton released, they actually have multiple instances of Meld, each with its own independent bitimbral synths, so you can really start to get crazy with it. So if you made it through all that talk about modulation, you're still with me, thanks for watching. We're going to make this patch available to download if you liked it. If you do, you can use it if you do have Ableton Live 12. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments below. Thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.